welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of StressFreeNow.info. We're happy today to have as our special guest, our special featured guest, Dr. Joe Serio, back with us again to speak about his best time management tips. Dr. Joe Serio is an international speaker, trainer, and author who holds a Ph.D. in criminal justice from Sam Houston State University with a specialization in leadership and organizational behavior. His career is highlighted by unique experiences in the former Soviet Union investigating the Russian mafia, including a year spent working in the Organized Crime Control Department of the Soviet National Police prior to the collapse of the USSR. Dr. Joe started his own company assisting foreign corporations in Russia and later became a consultant to the New York-based global corporate investigation and business intelligence firm Kroll Associates. Soon, he became the director of the Moscow office of Kroll, overseeing investigations across the former Soviet Union. While in Russia, he was also a consultant to major U.S. and European media companies and helped produce 3 documentaries for A&E's investigative reports. Back in the U.S., Dr. Joe devoted much of his time to finishing his Ph.D. and traveling around the U.S. speaking to corporate audiences on business security issues in Russia. He also served as editor-in-chief of the well-regarded magazine Crime and Justice International and as co-instructor of week-long programs on developing effective relationships with the media. Dr. Joe is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Investigating the Russian Mafia. The first of his 2 books in his Get the Nerve series are Overcoming Fear, 50 Lessons on Being Bold and Living the Dream, and Public Speaking, 50 Lessons on Presenting Without Losing Your Cool. Audience, welcome.
Great, Joe. Welcome. And audience, you're in for a treat. We have Dr. Joe Serio, who is now been on our show. I think this is our 3rd show with Joe, and so we have elevated him to the level of impresario, and it's well-deserved. Joe's a great guy, and he's hailing from Austin, Texas, the so-called weird city. I don't know how true that is, but welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Bob. Great to be here.
Hi, Joe.
Great to have you again. Joe, almost everyone today is complaining about how busy they are and how time seems to have speeded up. You know, we have more things to do in a day than day. And in fact, I believe Christine wrote an article about that. And
well, it was one of our podcast topics.
Yeah, we did a podcast actually on that in terms of the crunch that many people are feeling in terms of time. Now, in your book on time management, Joe, you make a distinction between real goals and fake goals, and I think part of the issue with time is that if a person is running after fake goals, of course they don't have enough time. So could you talk about how does a person distinguish between what their real goals are and what the fake goals are? Because you make a good point, which is that getting to the real goals brings you to a level of clarity that allows you to zero in on what you want and achieve it much faster.
Yeah, and there's a lot packed in what you've said so far. So, yes, people are chasing more, but there are also more distractions. Yes, there's more to do, but there are more games, more toys, more distractions, more things seemingly to worry about. I mean, let's not get into politics, but you know, the election and campaign for some people caused a lot of stress. So they're spending time, they're spending energy worrying about it and all the rest. So real goals and fake goals, I mean, that conversation takes us right into the heart of the matter. Because first, to define real goals and fake goals. Fake goals are when we say, oh, I want to lose weight. Oh, I want to have more money. You know, and they're goals that you just kind of say almost haphazardly or at least very vaguely. And there's no definition around what it is that you want. And the problem with that is your brain can't make sense of it. So, for example, when we look at the other goal, the real goal, or a SMART goal, as we call them, your brain then can wrap itself around the parameters of a real goal, of a SMART goal. And that's because it's specific. This is what SMART stands for. It's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's relevant, it's time-bound, right? There are metrics, there are details, there's timetables, there's measurements, all kinds of things like that. So to give a quick example, a fake goal, oh, I want to lose weight. A real goal or a SMART goal is I'm going to lose 15 pounds between January 1st and February 15th, and here's how I'm going to do it. I think part of the problem is a lot of people think in terms of fake goals, and they get overwhelmed, and they get stressed out, right? Your bailiwick. They get stressed out not being able to reach a goal that was never really well defined in the first place. So it's really a SMART goal, a real goal is about definition, and I call it COP. I mean, I deal with a lot of law enforcement people, so I actually call it COP. And COP, C-O-P, is clarity of purpose. It's clarity of purpose. And when you don't have clarity around your purpose, if you don't have clarity around your why, it's really difficult to create a real SMART goal and then successfully go get it.
That is so true, Joe, everything you said. And what stuck out for me was when you mentioned distraction. I think today there are just so many choices, it's easy to get sidetracked. One of the things that I've noticed about time or, planning out your day is you might start your day with an intention of doing A, but so many things come into your visual field and into your day that it's unexpected. We had met an organizer, and she said to leave 50% of your day unplanned. What do you do for these unexpected things that come up, and they're not really important? I guess it would go under, that system of the urgent, and it pulls you away from your priority, and that's how your goal disappears.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and another very central point, because before we even think about goal, we have to think about a couple of other things. Without getting too crazy philosophical at this point, what do you believe? What do you believe is true about yourself? What do you believe is possible? Right, and hopefully you've thought about these for weeks, months, years in your life. Who am I? What do I want? How am I going to get it? And out of that information, we set the priorities. What are my priorities? Is my family a priority? Is work a priority? Is money a priority? Is vacation, downtime, whatever, a priority? And so we have to set up that foundation first, beliefs, values, priorities. Then we can set goals after that. But things like New Year's resolutions and stuff like that without the foundation in place so often go by the wayside, right? People quit and they give up. And the thing is that we have to decide what the priorities are. And the reason for that is, number one, it helps us to define what the goals are going to be. But number two, also very important, is it helps us to be more clear about what we're going to say no to. In my seminars and workshops, I ask the question, how many people here have a hard time saying no? And so many hands go up at every session. And and people start moaning, and oh my God, yeah, I can't say no. And that's tied to a lot of other stuff. It's tied to potential guilt. It's tied possibly to the way you're raised. It's tied to all kinds of things. But the consequence is that now you're chasing all of these things that have not been defined as your goal, that have not been defined as your priority, because you haven't defined your priority. And so at the end of the week, we sit down and we say, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I haven't gotten done a fraction of the things I wanted to get done. Oh my God, so frustrating. I'm stressed out. And rarely do people stop and back up and say, oh, the time went away because I said yes to things I should have been saying no to. I've been saying yes to things that don't fit in my priorities, that don't fit in my goals. And so the other piece of that you mentioned is then how do we plan? I totally agree with, by the way, that plan 50% of your day. And the number ranges from 50% to 65%. But the fact of the matter is this. If you plan your day with a to-do list that takes up 100% of your day, or like many people, 120% of your day, and you write your to-do list in the morning when you're fresh and ambitious, and you write it like you're going to be a hero, and you're going to get all of these things done today, and then things happen, just like you mentioned. The boss walks in, gives you a project you didn't anticipate, you get a flat tire, your baby gets sick, all this stuff. And at the end of the day, you look at the to-do list, and what's the to-do list doing? Laughing at you. The to-do list is laughing at you, saying, you put 15 things on your list to get done today. I fooled you again. You didn't get them done. And you just carry them over to the next day. So for me, I just decided I needed to abolish that approach because I got tired of being frustrated at the end of the day and not getting things done. So what I ended up doing was said, let's put a layer in between goals and to-do lists. Let's make a master list. And the master list, the idea that I talk about in my classes and in my book is we have to create a system that captures everything. Why? Because I want my mind to be as empty as possible. I want my mind to be as receptive to new ideas, creativity, or just downtime or whatever as much as possible. That means my system has to capture everything. So one step in capturing everything is creating a master list. And the last time I wrote a master list, I had 67 items on it. Now that obviously is not going to be my to-do list, but it's a master list. That means anything that pops in my head goes on the list. It can be something that has to get done today, tomorrow, next week, next month, 6 months from now, a year from now. That way I have a home to capture everything. Then from the master list, I'll go grab 3 items, and that's my to-do list, and that's it. I go grab 3 items. If I get those 3 items done at 10 o'clock in the morning, what's the harm, right? So at 10 o'clock in the morning, my to-do list is finished. Now I go back to the master list. I can go grab 1, 2, 3 more items. And that way, when I get to the end of the day, ideally, there's nothing on my to-do list. Worst case scenario, maybe one thing. And it reduces my stress, reduces my frustration, keeps the momentum going, especially when I head into the afternoon and I'm getting tired and I'm working more slowly and I have less concentration and, all of that.
That's a very good system because I have observed, for myself and for others, when there are things left on the list undone and they're carried over to the next day and then the next week and then the next month, it leads to, feelings of self-loathing and disgust and frustration and self-recrimination. So being able to complete the things on your list and see the progress that you check this off as done, that reduces your stress and your frustration, makes you feel good about yourself, and you can see I'm moving toward my goal.
Right, and when you manage a to-do list, and a to-do list does not manage you. When you manage a to-do list, and you're going to pick a finite number, 1, 2, 3 things to do from your master list, the thing to be careful about is to pick the things that give you the biggest return. Because when we write a 15-item list, what are we going to do first? We're going to do the easy thing. We're going to do the fun thing so that when we cross off that item, we can have our dopamine release and, whatever. We get all excited and proud and we think we're a hero. Yeah, but the only thing you did was sweep your kitchen floor. You know what I mean? It's like,
Come
that's
on,
not a big
Joe. Dopamine release happens when you eat donuts too, and especially what are those glazed donuts? The store. What's that? The Krispy Kreme. I remember the first time someone said to me, they said, "You haven't had a real donut until you had Krispy Kreme." And I remember it was in Chelsea in Manhattan, and they had just opened the store, and we went in. And the guy said, "Oh, the donuts are just coming out." And so I don't think I had ever eaten a hot donut, just out of the oven. So, well,
serious sugar rush.
yeah. So talk about distraction, and then crash after that, like 45 minutes. Okay. So Joe, I want to thank you for several points that you made while you were talking, and I'm sure this happened for our audience too. When you mentioned the ability to say no or not say no, what it made me think of is that, I've never had an issue with saying no to when I really don't want to do something. I just say no, But I've talked to enough people, and it always had puzzled me how some people do have an issue with saying no, and then when they do say no, sometimes guilt comes up, etc. Christine and I, when we first met, Christine had worked with an NLP specialist named Linda Story, and she did a wonderful series of exercises with Christine. And one of the key takeaways from that training she did was that Linda Story has as her signature question, by saying yes to this, am I saying no to what I really want? So when you were talking, that's what I was thinking about, because Christine and I have been back and forth on this issue many years. Example would be, say, a single mom working 2 jobs and going to school at night to get a nursing degree or whatever. And so now her child comes home and says, Mommy, we need you to, the school is asking that you volunteer for the cake sale or something else that would take, maybe 5 hours every week. But she doesn't have the extra 5 hours. And so she would be feeling, if she says no, she's feeling guilt. The other parents are maybe doing that. But if she says yes, then it impinges on the other things that are really important that are going to move her forward. In fact, will probably catapult her. So when, Joe, could you tell our audience how would a person in that position, how could they not feel guilty? Is it as simple as just staying clear on what they really want?
So let's look at an alternative approach. So the issue is, how can we remain calm enough in our minds to think through the issue before all the emotion kicks in? Okay, so you have a mother who's been asked to sell cupcakes or cookies or whatever at the PTA fundraiser, and they say, "Can you please, sit at the table for 3 hours with us, bake cupcakes, and and contribute that way?" And she's got kids in the school, and she doesn't want to be a bad parent. She doesn't want to be a bad citizen of the school, so to speak. And so, as soon as that issue comes up, there might be the guilt, or the complaining, or the whatever. I don't have the time, and start to panic. But the other thing is, okay, what are my priorities? My priorities are my kids. My priorities are supporting the school. How am I going to satisfy both of those? And I really don't have the time to spend 5 hours. So the person comes back and says, "You know what? I'm unavailable to sit at the table, but let's do this. I'll contribute 3 dozen cupcakes to the cause." Right? So the school is getting something they need It may not be exactly what they were asking her for, but they're going to have to sort that out themselves. That's going to be okay. The mother then goes home and says, "Kids, we're going to make cupcakes." And then the mother and the kids together make the cupcakes. They've spent 3 hours together doing something, strengthening their bond, instead of the mother sitting at the table selling the cupcakes with the kids sitting on the side complaining that they're bored, or the mother not seeing the kids at all. Like, to me, that's an approach, a viable approach. It's like, how do I'm a huge believer in the 7 habits, excuse me, in the 7 habits of highly effective people. And it's this conscious, front of the mind thinking about how do I create win-win situations. So the mother can't control the reaction from the PTA. The only thing she can do is say, "Here's what I can offer you," and then leave it alone. Because one of the huge issues in saying no, and which is part of the guilt thing, is understanding who owns what. And so often we try to own other people's responsibilities. We try to own other people's emotions. We try to own other people's reactions. I say, no, that's their business. The school, the PTA committee, whatever it is, has the option to react or respond to my offer, just like I reacted or responded to their request. Can you sit for 5? No, I can't sit for that long. But here's what I can do. I can offer the cupcakes. And that's it. And then I go home and I play with my kids, make cupcakes with my kids, have fun, quality time with them, contribute to the PTA. And to me, that's a nice solution to that kind of an issue.
Yeah, I like that, Joe, and it's something that I'm sure our listeners appreciate it. And to be quite honest, I maybe my prefrontal cortex wasn't working right, but it never occurred to me to approach it from that way. Well, I want to just shift to something else, Joe, which is really critical. We were fortunate enough to have you invite us to see you speak at a talk last year in Tampa, Florida. And one of the things that you talked about, which is really has stuck with both Christine and I believe resonated with your audience, and it will resonate with our audience, is this issue of how do you find time to do the stuff that's really important, that is going to really give you the kind of leverage that when it's completed, it gives you residual satisfaction, residual income, and the completion of a medium and long-term goal that will catapult you forward. And what I'm speaking about specifically is that this issue of finding blocks of uninterrupted time. Now, during that workshop, you mentioned the fact that you were able to carve out some uninterrupted time early in the morning because you had clarity on your goal, which was that you wanted to write a series of books. And how are you going to get that done? Could you just speak to that issue of carving out on time that where it's uninterrupted? And and audience, I just want to mention this point when Joe held up the results, because the issue was, well, to be able to get up and do that, what time did he have to go to bed? And I just remember the chuckling.
So that's a great question, because all of these things, as we start to see, are interrelated and they're interconnected and they're symbiotic. So if you decide that you want to have what you want to have, then the next question is, how do you set up, your life and schedule, and how badly do you want it, and why do you want it, and what are you willing to do in order to get it? So for me, it was a big goal for me to write this book series. Next week, we're coming out with the 7th book, I believe it is, and this is in the last 2.5 years. And so I decided that if I'm going to do it, I'm going to set up my life just according to the same, kind of rules that I laid out in my book, and I can't just write the book, right? I have to live it. So I took the absolutely brilliant ideas in my book, and I had to apply them myself. And what did that mean? It meant understanding when is the best time of day for me. Well, my wife works at home. She has a job she works at Dell, and she works from home. And when she's done at work at 5:00, she wants to spend time in the evening. So when am I going to write books and also still have all the other responsibilities and tasks of running a business and going on the road and speaking and all the rest of it? And the answer was 4:00 in the morning. So I get up at 4:00 in the morning. I know the first thing I'm going to work on. So you talk about to-do lists and priorities and goals and all that. When you know what you're going to work on, it makes it very easy. I get out of bed, I go into my office, I turn on the computer, and the first project on my desk is going to be a book project. That's it. So what has that done? That's taken all the thinking out of it. And part of the question is, how many things in your life can you automate? So that's one piece of it. The second piece is this, and this is so critical, and most people don't do it. If you need to get something done, you must identify and dedicate a piece of time to it, which means, and there's only one thing it means it has to be on your calendar. If it's not on your calendar, it's not going to get done. If it's not scheduled like a meeting, it's not going to get done. So I can say, Bob comes up to me and says, "Hey, Joe, can you help me?" And I look at the clock, I say, it's 3:00 in the afternoon. I said, "Bob, let me check my calendar." I check my calendar, I say, I have a meeting at 3:00. Can I help you at 4? Or can I help you at 5? And he says, "Oh, sure, great." And he goes away. What he doesn't know and what he doesn't need to know is that my 3:00 meeting that I have scheduled on my calendar is with me. I scheduled it with myself. Because if you don't schedule time for yourself, you won't get done. You'll serve everyone else before yourself, and your thing won't get done. When I had to
Joe,
learn,
I have to cut you off. You should
okay.
see the huge smile on Christine's face, and you should see the knots that are raising on my head, because since I met Christine, we were just friends, we were dating, and then now we've been married over 10 years. She has emphasized the need to put things on the calendar, to schedule things, and to be honest, I have often resisted that. And,
yes, he has.
And I'm going to just as a quick segue, Christine has a cousin who he was lamenting. He was saying, he doesn't see his kids, as often, and I know a lot of people, they don't see their kids or grandkids as often as they would like. And then his son said to him, he says, "Well, you'll have to let me know. We'll schedule it." And he said, "What? I have to schedule time to see my son?" So I'm chuckling in the sense that I can think of, things that were important that fell through the cracks because they were not on my calendar. And then I'll just conclude saying this. I have a good friend in New York, and we have been trying to speak for the last several months. And we had scheduled, we said, okay, let's set Sunday to speak on the phone. And then the first Sunday went by, and it didn't happen. The second Sunday went by, and I had said I would tie a string on my finger. Well, the third Sunday went by. It was a Super Bowl, so I said, so now and then I said, oops, I had not put it on my calendar. So what you're talking about, well, Christine's smile is even huger, if that's even possible. It's wrapped all the way around her head. So, Joe, I know the people out there in our audience who use, I know some people are using the calendars on their phone, and I'm literally at that point where even though I've been using the paper calendar, I'm going to have to use the electronic calendar, because there are times I'm talking to someone and they'll say, "Oh, can you do it then?" And then if I don't have my calendar in front of me, it's already happened where I've been double booked, and that is
Right.
a real way to get clobbered.
Joe, can you tell that my husband is spontaneous? But planning has its virtues. On that note, audience, we will be back in a moment with our very special featured guest, Dr. Joe Serio, on Learn to Live Stress-Free.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Wright, Jr., the Stress Relief Doctor, co-host of the Learn to Live Stress-Free podcast series. I'm an author, speaker, and stress management wellness coach. My published study is the first to show the connection between stress reduction, grief recovery, nitric oxide spiking, and the relaxation response. And my practical application of this knowledge helps you relieve the stresses of everyday life. I have the tools to dissolve your pain points quickly and effectively. Email me to find out how you can start to feel better now at stressfreenow.info/contact. That's stressfreenow.info/contact. Have you been procrastinating about completing an important project or pursuing a treasured dream? Christine Wright specializes in helping her coaching clients to lay out clear, elegant strategies. She shows you how to quickly build your confidence to uncover and eliminate your habitual patterns of resistance and self-sabotage. Christine helps you discover those meaningful insights that will get you to do what works so you can celebrate your successes. Go to stressfreenow.info/contact to let Christine know that you're ready to live your ideal life now. Again, that's stressfreenow.info/contact.
Welcome back to Learn to Live Stress-Free. We're speaking with our special guest today, Dr. Joe Serio, giving us his best time management tips.
Before the break, we were talking about some things I'd love to follow up on if we have time.
Absolutely.
So I have two examples that I like to make it a little bit more kind of specific and real world, because there's some people in my audiences and there's some people listening who say, yeah, but I have kids and it's just too crazy and too hectic. I have a brother who's just brilliant and brilliant with time management and all of that. And he had things that he, tools, techniques that he put in place that I'd like to share. One is when his kids were small, even 6, 7, 8, when they were old enough to understand, he put some understandings in place. Understanding number one, this is a parent-centric household. The kids are not running the place. And understanding number two was, you guys, you kids, are allowed to ask me anything you want before 7 p.m. And you're allowed to ask me anything you want after 8 p.m. But between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m., you're not allowed to bother me or interrupt unless something's burning or somebody's bleeding. And from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., he would go in the garage and crank up the music and do woodworking. Now, my brother's not a carpenter, he's not a woodworker, whatever, but when he started this practice 30 years ago, he made, a nice little piece. You could tell it was an amateur, but he's been doing this for 30 years. So now he's a brilliant carpenter and a brilliant woodworker. What did he do? He got 1 hour of uninterrupted time on a regular basis, even having small kids. Then later, when the kids were older, the son was on the soccer team in high school, and they were a good team. His son was the goalie. They went on to win the state championship in high school 2 years in a row. And part of the deal, his father, my brother, said, I will go to every road game that you have. I will make that commitment. And my brother's a busy guy. And he said, here's the deal. When we go on the road with your high school team, we stay in a hotel room together. You're not going out. You're not going to hang out with your buddies and stay overnight with them. It's the deal. You come. If I promise to come, then we share a hotel room. And when we get to the hotel, you get to work studying, and I get to work studying. His father at the time was getting an MBA, and his father ended up. He's a dentist. He's got a specialty in periodontics. He has a master's degree. He has an MBA. The son got great grades in school, studied very well, got a fantastic job out of college. He's like 27 years old now, lives in London, travels all over the world, makes good money, and all of that springs from not elitism. They're not wealthy. They're not outrageously, whatever, endowed, talented, skilled, whatever. They put a plan in place. And there are a lot of pieces to this plan. And a piece of the plan was, here's how we spend our time. Because the time is spent on what you proclaim you want to get. Oh, you want to have good grades, and I want you to have good grades? Great, we'll work on it together. And together they conquered all kinds of worlds. It was incredible. And that's the deal. It's not, I'm too busy. That's the excuse people use. It's not, I don't have money. That's another excuse. Will it be challenging? Yes. Will it be difficult? Yes. And one of the tests against resistance, the test you have to ask yourself is, how much do I want it? Because without this stuff clearly defined, resistance will raise its head every time in the form of, like you said earlier, Christine, self-loathing, fear, intimidation, embarrassment, whatever. Resistance is always there to raise its head. And if you fall into the trap of giving resistance that power and not defining what you want, your time is going to go out the window, and you're going to wake up one day and say, oh my goodness, I didn't do half the things I wanted to do in life.
Very true, Joe. And I think part of it in terms of fear and resistance is that I think sometimes some people, some of us, we forget we're adults. And we're not little children. We're not helpless. But when it's something we want, we will do excuses. I can't do that because. And it's not really true, because you're grown, you're competent, you're capable. But it's just this fear that, what is it Marianne Williamson said? We're not afraid of what we can't do. We're afraid of having what we say we want. Mm-hmm. And just to declare a thing and go for it takes a bit of courage. And I think that's what people sometimes forget or start to make those excuses for. There's something that I want to ask you about, Joe, because you have talked about this too, that in our time management, we'll get caught up with a job and we think it's only going to take so long, and it takes longer. And where we cut corners is on our sleep. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people going around sleep deprived. They've got a long commute. The drive takes longer than they can. But do we really want anybody behind the wheel sleepy? Do we want to meet someone who's sleep deprived and they get cranky as all get go? Or the cognitive function is impaired. Their memory's not so hot. But there are many, many people walking around sleep deprived that where they cut corners is not on taking that 15th thing off their to-do list, which they're not going to get done in the day. But I only need 4 hours sleep and I'm as sharp as a tack. Not really. Mm-hmm. Could you speak to that, the importance of sleep in this thing?
Sure. So all of this stuff is interconnected, as I mentioned earlier. So when you create a master list and you create a to-do list and you finish the items on your list, and you have a system like the master list or calendars or all these other things that we can talk about, when you have a system that captures everything, the fewer things that you have to keep on your mind. And the fewer things I keep on my mind, the easier it is going to be for me to fall asleep at night. Also, I don't use electronics in bed. I don't look at my cell phone. I don't, check Facebook, when I'm in bed. And the other thing is this. I mentioned I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm in bed at 8:30, and I fall asleep because I get up at 4 o'clock, and I have a pretty packed day, whether it's traveling, writing, whatever. I fall asleep in just 5 minutes. And now, do I have days that I'm worried? Yes. There are days that I'm like, I can't sleep, or I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, or I do have something coming up that's bothering me. And I have two rules. One is, if there's something I can do about it at that moment, then I get out of bed and go do it. And I try to not let that happen too much. The second thing is, If there's nothing I can do about it, I stay in bed and go through breathing exercises before I get out of bed, before I abandon the attempt to fall asleep. Because I totally believe that sleep thing. Can I go 4 hours? Sure. Can I go 4 hours for 3 days in a row? Sure. On the fourth, fifth day, I'm going to feel horrible, and I'm going to not perform well, and I'm going to spend, 5 hours on a Saturday afternoon sleeping, catching up, and I can't do that. Why can't I do that? Because my wife is not sleeping, and I'm part of my priority is spend time with my wife. So I have to make sure. The bottom line for me is I have to make sure I set myself up for success. And setting myself up for success means I go to the gym, I get enough sleep, I eat right, I keep the priorities in order. And the sleep is one of the most critical ones.
Very much so. I remember when I was in high school, it was very interesting. It was during test prep training. And that trainer said, and I believed it at the time, but it was much easier for me to do it at 20 than it is at, 20 plus. That's what I'll admit to now. His premise was, if you need to finish this thing, just stay up as long as it takes and finish it. And when I was in college, I did that, and I didn't feel the effects. But as you said, after the second, third, or fourth day, you're really not performing well, and it's not in your best interest of health or anybody else's interest when you're sleep deprived. I had a friend who's the mother of 2 young children, and when the youngest one was a baby, she and the father, they weren't getting much sleep, and they were always fighting with each other. So I know that getting sleep is very important to your performance, and I have seen many people cut that one thing, and it causes problems, if not right away, soon enough.
Just very briefly, we can expand that out, right? And you say, okay, I don't have the sleep, so I'm crankier. I have a knee-jerk reflex and get into arguments quicker. Now I have a problem with my wife, my husband, and now how much time am I going to waste or spend or whatever being angry or having a fight or tiptoeing around the house, and all these things, all this stuff contributes to, number one, your time management issue, and number two, your stress issue.
But also, Joe, the fact that you took that angle is making the assumption that when the person goes off the rails like that it can be repaired. People talk about this know, like, and trust model, but for some people, it's know, trust, and like. So
right.
So when you break trust, right, that there's some things that once people say the thing or do the thing, it can't be fixed. It can be a Humpty Dumpty moment. For example, sometimes there are relationships that are held together very tenuously, like hanging by its fingernails. And then let's say the person goes 2-3 days, sleep deprived, and then they lash out by saying something nasty or totally inappropriate, and the person might say, that's it, they snap. And then for the other person, they're like, what just happened? They don't even know. Right? And so I've seen that so many times, and I'm sure people in our audience are aware of situations where on either side, especially the person that has been very patient, and I think we're all familiar with this expression where the person says he or she is they're on their last nerve, right? Where it's really they've been holding their breath for a long time, and then now the thing happens that becomes the last straw that breaks the camel's back. I like to call it the Humpty Dumpty moment. So Joe, in something that you said earlier, and then as I was flipping through your time management book, and in fact, I just want to give the title of your book, Joe, because it's so excellent. I have the habit when I read a book, a book that I own, I want to make that clear, not a library book, but a book that I own, I mark it up, highlights, bullet points, I dog-eared, and Kristen
I
is
can
actually...
give testimony to that because I won't touch a book that Bob has read because it is worked over.
I really read the book, and sometimes I'm reading a book and, I'm reading over 3 or 4 pages in a 200-300-page book because I'm like, do you realize how brilliant this is? So Joe Serio's book is called Time Management, 50 Lessons on Finding Time for What's Important, Your Guide to Success in Life. And Joe, although I've complimented you many times on your book, I'm looking at this, I'm on page 31 of this book, and this is on the issue of procrastination. And I wanted to share this with the audience because on page 31 of this book, you're talking about your relationship with your father and how that relates to procrastination and perfectionism. And so whether it's the relationship with the daughter and the mother, the daughter and the father, the son and, et cetera, or the siblings, these issues of procrastination and perfectionism in terms of how it relates to time management and the fear of success. I just want to read very briefly and then have you address this issue because when I read this, I have this page all marked up in dog ear, it literally jumped off the page for me. And I know when people are reading and they get to a place in a book, that's the really good part where they can relate to it. So I just want to read this where what you said, you're talking about procrastination. And then you said, perhaps all would have been lost for me had I not caught my father's bragging about his kids to outsiders, because you're talking about the fact that your father never said directly to you, good job, et cetera, that kind of thing. You're saying that your father was proud, but he seemed that he chose not to let that secret be known to us in order to protect us from resting on our laurels. And then you say, without my father's acknowledgement and praise, the message I interpreted was that nothing I did would ever be good enough. And then you close by saying, but here's the point. He never actually said, you're not good enough. It was my interpretation of his message that pushed me into procrastination. And so when I read that, I said, how many of us have had that same thing? I know in a previous podcast, you gave the example, Joe, of your father. You came home, you said, oh, Dad, look, I got a 97 on the test. And he said to you, what happened to the other 3%? And although we chuckled, and, as a kid, that really hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of the problem or part of the issue or part of the dynamic of all the things we're talking about is our interpretation of who we think we are. And kind of the reference that you made earlier to Marianne Williamson quote. It's the interpretation of who we think we have to be when we're 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, and we perpetuate that interpretation without reconstructing ourselves, so to speak, without thinking, without rethinking, without renewing our thoughts about ourselves when we're 20 or 25 or 35 or 45. I mean, I'm 52 years old, and yesterday I had a situation where I had to step back and reinterpret and say, oh, maybe that assumption of mine was wrong. Maybe that perception of mine was wrong. And part of the issue with all of this, whether it's fear, emotional intelligence, time management, all the things that we face in life, is how did we interpret who we believed we were or who we believed we had to be, and have we gone through a reinterpretation of those things in an effort to set ourselves free? So last month, I launched a in-person 10-month, 10-module leadership academy, and it's for organizations. But the first modules are about this stuff. It's not directly or overtly related to leadership. It's related to personal leadership, because we have to think about fear and resistance and emotional intelligence and stress and mindfulness and all these things before we get to the point of thinking about organizational behavior or thinking about our organizational leadership or all that. I think we need to figure out, or at least start to ponder questions like, who am I? What do I want? How am I going to get it? Those three questions for me are some of the key questions, and they relate directly to our time management, which is related to, what do you think is possible? Which is related to, how optimistic are you or hopeful are you? Which is related to, what does your self-esteem look like? And to me, that's at least the way I construct it in my mind and in my books, because I need to sort out at least, not everything. I don't need to ask why about every little aspect of my life, but I need to sort out a couple of big issues so that I can free myself from identifying myself through other people's eyes and seeing or believing that I'm not good enough. And I need to just move forward with all the wonderful and crazy and eccentric things that are bouncing around in my head, and go write these books that I want to write, regardless of what anyone's going to think about them, or regardless of what anyone's going to think about me and my worth as a human being in the context of these projects. Because these projects, for me, books and whatever, presentations, are the expression of what's going on inside of me. And that's kind of one of the only goals I have left in the big picture umbrella goal for my life, is to express myself. Can I express myself well? Can I express myself freely? Can I express the true self, the big self, when I'm being my big self and not my small self, when I'm acting in assistance to myself and others instead of resistance? Then now we have a chance of experiencing the fullness of my life, right? That's how I look at it.
Doggone it, Joe. You got me all weepy here. I'm looking at the tissue box.
Very profound, Joe. Thank you so much. I think that happens to many of us. We're tying ourselves up with thoughts and regrets of the past, and they were made on wrong assumptions. We were younger, we knew less, we didn't understand the other person's perspective, and we take what somebody said or did to us and we put it in front of us as a stone wall, and we don't move past it or through it. We can get caught up in both the past and the future, and it's not true. It's not real. And what you said was so true and so profound. I really want to thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. I believe this. I totally believe that our leadership, our personal leadership, our organizational leadership, our time management, our weight, our exercise, our nutrition, our sleep habits and patterns, our communication style, it's all thoroughly and profoundly interconnected with each other, with each of those components. And when we kind of approach our lives in a holistic sense, and we've taken the time to sit back and think and feel and meditate about our lives and about the life we want to create, the self we want to create, because we get to create, and when we go into that with forgiveness and compassion and self-compassion and understanding and patience, I think that's what Marianne Williamson's talking about. We can have lives that are just so much bigger and greater and things we couldn't have imagined, and that idea can frequently scare us.
Yes, very true. Well, Joe, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today. As always, we enjoyed having you here on the show to speak with us and to share your wisdom with our audience. And I'd like to ask you at this time, as we do, to just let our audience know how they can get in touch with you, how they can work with you, and learn more about all the great things you have to share.
Well, my website is joeserio.com, joeserio.com. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, Joe Serio Enterprises. I think I'm Joe Speaks at Joe Serio or something, or Twitter or whatever it is. I don't know. I think it's Joe Speaks is a Twitter handle, and and even my email for that matter is joe@joeserio.com. So it's pretty easy to find me, pretty easy to reach me. Happy to help.
Okay, wonderful. So, audience, it's very easy to find Joe. Follow his name, joeserio.com, JOESERIO, joeserio.com. Check him out on LinkedIn, Twitter. Just drop him a line or take a look at his website.
Great, Joe. Thank you so much for being our featured guest today. What final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience listeners to take away from today's broadcast?
Well, there's so many, but right off the bat, I'd say start working toward getting off your own back. Because the fact of the matter is, when it comes to time management, self-sabotage is probably the biggest issue that we have. It's not everybody else interrupting us. It's us interrupting us.
Wow, Joe. Thank you for that. And thank you for being our featured guest today. I know our audience loves what you just said, and it resonates so magnificently with them. Thank you, Joe.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to thank you again for being our featured guest today, and I want to thank our audience so much for listening wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in right now. We appreciate your presence and trust that you'll benefit in some way from the information delivered during today's show. We welcome and look forward to receiving your comments about our show. Please let us know if there are additional topics you'd like us to cover or a guest you enjoyed whom you'd like us to invite back. Please contact us through our website with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience the same benefits our coaching clients get with us, including learning how you can get more results in your day and easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. Mention that you heard our Stress-Free podcast show, and you'll receive a free gift from us. Call today to schedule your appointment. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of StressFreeNow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.